Right, hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm sorry it's been so long since my last video. I've been quite busy these past few weeks with things like exams and work experience, and I had a video which was meant to come out last week about Jorge Martin, but then he announced he was staying at Aprilia, so that video was immediately out of date, and I just scrapped it in the end. There's a lot going on, it's been a while, I'm sorry, okay, but we're back now, and I want to make my return by just talking about the latest weekend in Brno, because it was a really interesting weekend, returning to Brno for the first time since 2020. It was a great weekend, and I just want to talk about it, just to get into the swing of things again. So let's get straight into it. So, of course, MotoGP came back to Brno for the first time since 2020. It's been 4 years of not having it on the calendar, and I'm so glad it's back. Brno is an amazing track. It's produced some amazing races in the past. I've really missed it during its absence, and I'm just glad it's back in the long-term future. And the fact it's, a relatively new track compared to the rest of the calendar, combined with some very dodgy weather across the weekend, it meant that no team had any sort of base setting for the weekend, and it made a really exciting weekend because no one really knew what they were going into. It was a great weekend and quite chaotic as well. The first thing I want to talk about is the sprint race, because this was especially chaotic. The sprint race was looking just like any ordinary sprint race this year. Marc Marquez was dominating everyone, Bagnaia was a close second, and it just seemed like it'd peter out into a fairly ordinary sprint race. But then all of a sudden the two Ducatis had to back off and go behind people in order to sort out their tyre pressures, which haven't been an issue too much in recent races, but the tyre pressure gremlins came back and it really affected the two Ducatis. Bagnaia especially was second at one point, and he ended up finishing 7th because of him dropping back for tyre pressure issues, and he was never able to regain the pace he had, so he finished 7th. Marc Marquez, as usual, he managed to win anyway, and it was just a complete farce of a race. No one knew what was going on, and apparently what actually happened was there was an issue in the limit set by Dorna. Somebody had put in the wrong limit for tyre pressures, meaning teams would have the limit flash up on their screen, even though they weren't actually over the limit. To have that kind of mistake at such a high level is it's just ridiculous. Hopefully something like that doesn't happen again, because it caused absolute chaos, and to see the racing be decided by tyre pressures, we just don't want to see it. Apparently, to add on to this, Bagnaia's bike had an electronic issue, meaning the tyre pressure warning was flashing up even when he wasn't over the limit. It was a complete disastrous sprint race for Bagnaia, especially after getting his first pole position. The sprint race couldn't have gone worse, really. But yeah, this was a pretty farcical sprint race, to be honest, and hopefully something like that doesn't happen again, because yeah, it made for some confusing viewing from my end. However, it did mean that Bastianini could get a sprint podium, so it wasn't all bad. Moving on to Sunday now, and we'll start with the MotoGP race. This was quite a good race. The first few laps of the race were really entertaining, quite chaotic. In the end though, it was just Marc Marquez who got to the front and pulled away and won. That man is just inevitable at this point. We may as well just hand him the World Championship now. He's won 9 races out of 12 this year. He's won 5 in a row. He's got 5 sprint wins and main race wins in a row. He's just unstoppable at this point. And especially now that Alex Marquez is 120 points behind, there's no hope in catching him. Alex Marquez had a disastrous weekend this weekend. Jesus Christ. After qualifying in 8th place, for the sprint race, Alex Marquez started by slipping on a tear-off at the start, which, can happen to anyone. It's just unfortunate, really. He then proceeded to finish in 19th place. He was unable to recover at all. It was a disastrous Saturday for him, and Sunday was no better in the end, because he had a decent start, he was in the mix, he was fighting Joan Mir, and then he pulled off a bit of a bonsai move at turn 12, hit Joan Mir and took them both out. Alex Marquez now has a penalty for the next race, and he successfully ruined both his and Joan Mir's race, and there was a bit of an argument between the two after the crash. A disastrous weekend for Alex Marquez. He just needs to move on to the next race. And if it wasn't clear already, the title race after that is completely done. Alex Marquez, if he really did want to win this World Championship, because because finishing in second all the time, he's not really been able to fight Marquez that often. He needed to stay consistent and not make any mistakes and just rely on Marquez making mistakes. But recently Alex Marquez has had a few mistakes and a few crashes which weren't his fault. Yeah, there's been some, poor results for him, and, I think he now needs to focus on finishing in second in the championship ahead of Bagnaia. Speaking of Bagnaia, it was another poor weekend for Pecco, in my opinion. I know he got his first pole position, which was impressive. He played his cards very well in qualifying. But when it came to the racing, he just didn't have the pace once again this weekend. We've already touched on what happened in the sprint race, but in the main race, he just didn't have the pace. He was showing some speed early on, but I think he'd burnt his tyres out because he suddenly dropped like a stone, really. He showed a bit more pace towards the end, but by that point it was too late and he was unable to get third. He finished fourth in the end, and on a weekend where Alex Marquez scored 0 points, Bagnaia would have hoped to take a bit better advantage than that. I'm sure he would have hoped to have gained more than 16 points this weekend. It's another poor weekend for Pecco, and to be honest, I think this summer break couldn't come quick enough for him. He needs to do a full reset and come back strong. The next race is Austria. It's one of his favourite tracks. To be honest, I expect him to win that one. Marc Marquez, I don't think he's ever won around Austria, so, this is really Bagnaia's chance to, stamp his authority and, get a bit of momentum on his side. I expect him to be at least challenging for the win in that race, because, since Mugello, really, his pace has been pretty... Even in Mugello, he only got fourth. His pace this entire year, really, has just been not good enough, and yeah, he just needs a full reset, I think. The two men who beat Bagnaia to the podium were Marco Bezzecchi in second and Pedro Acosta in third. I'll touch on Bezzecchi first. When I made a video reviewing the race in Qatar, I'm fairly sure I mentioned Bezzecchi, he was in really bad form at the time, and I'm fairly sure I said something along the lines of, he needs to get his act together, otherwise he'll be out of a ride soon enough. And since then, or since the British Grand Prix, he has turned it around so well. Him and Aprilia have really stepped it up. Marco Bezzecchi, since after the French Grand Prix, I think he's been the second best rider on the grid, to be honest. He's got 3 podiums, a race win in Silverstone, he's now 4th in the championship. He's really turned it around, and so have Aprilia. Super impressive from Marco Bezzecchi, showing the form he showed in 2023, which we haven't seen for a while from him. It's glad to have him back, and it's really fun to see him competing at the front regularly. And Pedro Acosta got in third in the end, his first podium of the year. He also got second in the sprint race. A really good weekend for Pedro Acosta. He's really been dealt a bit of a tough hand this year with the KTM. I'm still convinced that KTM is a really hard bike to ride and to be fast. But this weekend, the conditions played to his advantage. It was a fairly unknown track, so teams didn't have any base setting. The lack of dry weather running as well meant that, the truly most talented riders rise to the top, and Pedro Acosta took full advantage of it, did well to hold on to a podium in the end, and I was really impressed with Acosta this weekend, and it's capped off what has been a pretty impressive first half of the season from him. Behind them lot we had Raul Fernandez finishing in 5th, which was a brilliant result from him. He had a fantastic weekend overall, and I'm really glad that he's been able to turn it around as well. Because like Bezzecchi, he was having a disastrous season. After 5 rounds he had scored a grand total of 6 World Championship points, and there were serious rumours of him being kicked out of Trackhouse despite the fact he had a contract. We saw Manuel Gonzalez testing for Aprilia as well after Aragon, and it seems like since then Raul Fernandez has really kicked on, and it seemed to have motivated him, the threat of losing his seat. He's had some very solid results since Aragon, and a 5th place here is his best one by far. He also got 6th in the sprint race. Really impressive from him, and I think with his current form he's shown that he's worthy of staying on the grid, and I think he'll get his seat for next year. While we're talking about Aprilia, I may as well talk about Jorge Martin, because one of the big stories of this weekend was the fact that Jorge Martin was finally returning. After confirming that he would be staying with Aprilia for 2026, Jorge Martin returns to the grid and honestly put in a really impressive weekend, I think. Finishing 7th in the main race, managing to get straight to Q2 in the wet practice. He had a very good weekend considering it was his first one back. 9 points, he's already got more points than Miguel Oliveira after a grand total of 2 races. It was a good weekend for Jorge Martin and a good building block that he can now, look to improve on once we come back to Austria. And Austria is a good track for him, so considering Jorge Martin's hit the ground running pretty well so far, I wouldn't be shocked to see Jorge Martin challenging in and around the top 5 in Austria, seriously. Elsewhere on the grid, Yamaha had a fairly average weekend. Quartararo, as usual, managed to qualify really well, qualifying in 3rd. He didn't have the race pace though to stay up there, so he finished in 6th in the end, which, compared to the rest of the Yamaha squad, that's a really good result. Jack Miller finished in 10th in the end. You know, it's a decent result for Yamaha, but to me it just seems like that Yamaha really need to work on the race pace of that bike. We've seen from Quartararo this season that their qualifying bike is really good. It's very competitive over one lap, but across a full race they just can't compete very well. And when a world-class rider like Fabio Quartararo just can't even beat Raul Fernandez, there's still work to be done on that bike. Honda also had a fairly underwhelming weekend, to be honest. Johann Zarco was showing pace in the wet, but when it came to the dry, he just didn't have the pace. He finished in 13th in the end. The highest finishing Honda was Luca Marini in 12th. Joan Mir looked on course for, a really good weekend, but he got crashed out in both the sprint race and the main race. That man's luck is just ridiculous. He's been so unlucky recently, and I do think that if he was able to, stay on the bike, if he didn't get punted into, he would have got a really good result. So super unlucky for him, but overall it was a pretty underwhelming weekend for Honda. One man who had a really underwhelming weekend was Fabio Di Giannantonio. He had an absolute shocker. Didn't score a single point, finishing in 16th in the main race. Behind Alex Rins, Paul Espargaro, that's an abysmal weekend for Fabio Di Giannantonio. I don't know what went on with him, especially after such a positive weekend in Germany when he looked on course for 2nd place until he crashed. Yeah, I have no idea what happened with him. Hopefully he can turn it around next weekend, because he was really bad this weekend. And finally, I want to talk about KTM. Of course, I've already talked about Acosta, and Vinales was missing for this weekend after his injury. But apart from that, Bastianini had his first really good weekend on the KTM. Unfortunately, he crashed out in the main race while running in 4th, but he still got a sprint podium and just generally looked much faster this weekend. I think this weekend was the first time he got through to Q2 all season. You'll have to fact check me on that one, I'm not too sure. Yeah, he had a really good weekend until his crash, but things looked like it was on the up for Bastianini. He seemed to have a bit more pace in the bike, and hopefully this is a sign of things to come, because it's been a bit depressing seeing him languishing at the back all season. And of course, in the absence of Vinales, we saw Paul Espargaro return to the grid, and he ended up having a really good weekend. He finished in 9th in both the sprint race and the main race, picking up 8 championship points. Honestly, a really good weekend for him, fair play to him, and it's always fun to see a competitive stand-in rider. Yeah, a good weekend from Paul Espargaro, and, he did a good job considering he was trying to place Maverick Vinales. He still scored a good amount of points for that team. And with that, let's now move on to Moto2. This was a very fascinating weekend. We saw a lot of different people running around the front to usual, shown by the fact that Joe Roberts won the Grand Prix. This was his first time being at the front all season really. He's really struggled with injury since Phillip Island last year. It was his first real return to form, and he did so in fantastic style. He looked unstoppable all weekend, came home for a fairly comfortable win in the end, and it was great to see, to come full circle with his recovery. Yeah, it was a great moment and a great performance from Joe Roberts. Barry Bottas was unlucky to get 2nd yet again. It's his 4th second place of the year, but it's still good World Championship points for him. It keeps him in the championship battle somewhat. Yeah, Barry Bottas, he's had a really good year so far. He's looked very competitive, got some really solid results. And, he's 3rd in the championship, mostly from consistency. If he can just squeeze out 1 or 2 victories, who knows, he could end up fighting properly for the World Championship. And in 3rd was Manu Gonzalez. It was a good weekend from him. One that, he clearly didn't have the pace to win, but when he can't win, coming home to collect 3rd place is not bad at all. It keeps him well, within the hunt for the championship. I say that, he's leading the championship by 25 points now. It gives him a good buffer in the championship. He's got a 25 point lead over Aaron Canet. And yeah, just consistency is what Gonzalez needs at this point, which is something that, I was doubting that he had in him, but he's been really consistent this season. Only a few mistakes which has led to crashes or just poor results. Apart from that, he's looked great this season and he looks set for the World Championship. My only concern with him is is he as good as Aaron Canet in the flyaway races, because Canet looked really competitive in them last season. I guess we'll find out. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this championship battle unfolds in the second half of the season. I mentioned Aaron Canet, he had a disastrous weekend. After a fairly, underwhelming weekend in Germany, he finished in 7th, which wasn't the best result really. He had an even worse weekend this weekend. He crashed in qualifying, starting in 18th place, and at the very first corner he crashed out completely on his own. And at that point there was no hope for him and he just retired. A disastrous weekend for Canet. Nothing seemed to work for him. He just needs to put it behind him and look forwards to the upcoming races. Like I said, I really back him to be competitive and, almost dominant in the flyaway races. He was really good at them last year, so I'm not going to write off Aaron Canet in this championship battle at all. I still think that he could be the favourite over Gonzalez, just from his experience from being in the championship battle last year. Aaron Canet, he's built his championship battle this season purely from consistency really. Canet has only won 1 race this season, while Gonzalez has 4. However, Canet's been really consistent. This was his first non-score of the entire year, while Gonzalez has already had 2, and every race Canet has finished inside the top 8 up until this weekend. He's been really consistent and he just needs to keep that up and look ahead to the Austrian Grand Prix after the summer break. If he can stay consistent and then, have the upper hand maybe in the flyaway races, I see no reason why he can't win this championship still. Looking a bit further down the grid, we have Daniel Holgado, who finished in 4th. It was a super impressive weekend from him. He was able to qualify in 5th and just stay in 4th place for the entire race. It was a super impressive and consistent ride from him, adding to what's already been a really impressive debut season from him. Yeah, I've been really impressed with Holgado this season. I wasn't expecting him to be this far ahead of David Alonso, but he is, and I think the main difference between the two is that Holgado seems much better at qualifying than David Alonso. Alonso was never the greatest at qualifying, and it didn't really matter in Moto3 because you can just barge your way through the field, but in Moto2 you can't do that as much. So Alonso's already left on the back foot fighting through the field, while Holgado, he keeps qualifying on the second row, so he's always just going to get results in and around there. But speaking of Alonso, my point's kind of backed up here. He qualified in 19th place, but he recovered really well, finished in 9th place in the end. A great ride from him, and it's really good to see him getting to grips with Moto2. If he can just sort out his qualifying, I think he'll be a consistent front runner very soon. The final person I want to talk about from Moto2 is Diogo Moreira. Of course, after his horrendous crash he caused in Germany, he deservedly got a pit lane start for this race, which pretty much ruined his race. He was never going to have any sort of good result, and he just, pit and retired after like 6 laps or whatever. But despite that, he was having a terrible weekend anyway. He had no pace in the wet, crashed in qualifying. It was just a complete write-off for him, and combine this with last weekend in Germany, it's been a real dent to his title challenge. And if he continues this bad run of form, it could end up costing him a MotoGP seat next year, because I'm seeing a lot of rumours saying he could be going to MotoGP next year. I'm not entirely convinced he's all that ready yet. I think he could do with another year in Moto2, but that's just me. He's shown some serious pace. He just, a rookie mistake really, a very dangerous mistake really in Germany, cost him this weekend as well. I don't know, something tells me he could benefit with having another season in Moto2, just to really iron out the silly mistakes like he made in Germany. But yeah, Moreira obviously super talented, but this weekend was a complete write-off for him, and one that could end up costing him if he is to have a say in his title battle. So after this weekend we have Manu Gonzalez leading the championship by 25 points over Aaron Canet. Then there's a big gap, a 29-point gap to his teammate Barry Bottas, and then Diogo Moreira and Jake Dixon are closely followed behind, and everyone behind that has no chance in my opinion. To be honest though, Jake Dixon clearly isn't consistent enough in my opinion to be in the title battle. Moreira and Bottas, although they're clearly talented riders, I'm not sure if they have the consistency long term. I don't know, I feel like, considering they're still quite young, those two are the most likely to make mistakes. I do think the championship battle is entirely between Canet and Gonzalez, and I think this is one that's going to go right to the wire. There's not much separating those two. They're clearly good in different areas, and I think it's going to be a really thrilling title battle between those two. With that, let's now move on to Moto3. This race wasn't quite as dramatic as some Moto3 races have been in recent weeks. This was dominated by Jose Antonio Rueda. He looked unstoppable this weekend, just like he has been all season really. He won the race by 3.5 seconds, and behind him there was a complete mess of who was fighting for second. But I'll touch on Rueda first. He looks unstoppable. He looks certain for winning the championship at this point. When I talked about, the race in Qatar, it was pretty close between him and Piqueras. Since then, Jose Antonio Rueda has pulled off a 85-point gap to Piqueras. He is dominating this championship. He's won 7 of the 12 races so far. Nothing can stop him really. And yeah, he looks certain for this title, and it's completely 100% deserved. He is just a class above everyone else. Behind him, there was a complete mess in who was fighting for second, but in the end it was Max Quiles who nipped second right at the end from David Munoz. Quiles, I've not had a chance to talk about him because he joined late in the season. He's been so impressive so far this season. He got his first win in Mugello, and in every race so far he's looked super competitive. He's really fast, he's got quite a few pole positions already I think. He is a star for the future. I think he just needs to iron out a few mistakes and be a bit less reckless. But he clearly has so much speed, and next year I really think he'll be a strong contender for the world title. Another man who could potentially be a title contender next year is David Munoz. He had a disastrous start to the season, scoring in only 2 of the opening 7 races. However, since the British Grand Prix, he has really turned it on. He's won 2 races, he finally got his first win in Aragon, and he seems like he's matured a lot in the past few weeks. I'm really glad to see it. He's finally become a bit less reckless, and I think because of his bad start to the season, his title hopes for this season are already gone. But next season, if he stays in Moto3, which I think he should, if he stays, I think he'll be a strong contender for the title next season, because he seems to have matured. He knows how to win a race now, and to come from starting last on the grid to finishing in 3rd is a seriously impressive ride. So David Munoz, well done to him, because he was seriously impressive this weekend. Behind him, Angel Piqueras just missed out on a podium in the end, finishing in 4th place. And since I talked about him in Qatar, his season's really gone downhill. He's not scored a podium since Jerez. He's had 2 non-finishes in France and Britain. And yeah, his title hopes have really fallen apart at the seams. And I don't know, at this point I'm still wondering whether he is ready to go to Moto2 next season, or whether he would benefit from another season in Moto3. There is always going to be a lot of talk about him moving up to the empty helmet squad in Moto2, but I don't know, with his current form, maybe just staying in Moto3 for another year would be the best option for him. However, despite that, considering there's very clearly a spot for him in Moto2, I think he is going to end up in Moto2. Let's just hope for his sake that he can regain some form and win some races between now and then. So, after this weekend, the Moto3 Championship looks like this. We of course have Jose Antonio Rueda. He's dominating the championship. He's leading by 85 points over Angel Piqueras. Piqueras is 10 points ahead of Alvaro Carpe. He had a bit of an underwhelming weekend. I think he was suffering from a crash in practice, so he wasn't at full fitness for the race. Finished in 12th. Not a great weekend, but he still had a very impressive debut season. Behind him, we've got Max Quiles, David Munoz and Joel Kelso all quite close within each other. Joel Kelso was missing this weekend from an injury. Hopefully he can return to the grid soon after the summer break. And below them, it's just a complete mess of loads of inconsistent people. It really seems like it's Piqueras' championship to lose. An 85-point lead is outrageous. Unless he gets terribly injured or his form falls off a cliff in the second half of the season, it's his championship which is sewn up. The more interesting battle really is for second. It's quite close between 2nd and 6th at the moment. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see who does get 2nd place, and more importantly really, who gets promoted to Moto2 next season. Because Rueda seems a dead certain to go up, but out of the rest of the grid, I'm not sure who could go up. Maybe I'll make a video about that. But with that is everything I wanted to talk about from this weekend in Brno. A very fascinating and exciting weekend, and I'm just glad to have Brno back on the calendar. So now I want to know what you guys think, so let me know in the comments. What do you think of Brno being back on the calendar? Did you enjoy this weekend? And just let me know your thoughts on some of the things I said. Let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. I promised I'll get my upload schedule together now. you know, I've got some spare time now. I'll get some videos uploaded consistently, hopefully. I've got plenty of ideas, so you should see a constant stream of videos from this channel in the next few weeks. But yeah, with that, I'll see you guys very soon. Bye bye.